All right, everybody ready for another paper? This gentleman I know very well. He did a paper last year for us, and I talked to him quite frequently this week already with the 2 days and so forth. Cornelius Gould is the audio professing architect of AngryAudio LCC, developer of the Audio Chameleon?
Audio Chameleon.
Chameleon. Line of audio processors, including the preprocessors for AM and FM, air chains, microphone processing, and streaming audio processing solutions. There is a numerous list of things that he's got here that he has done before and now and so forth. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Cornelius Gould.
Hello. Welcome. Thank you for coming out. Today we're going to be talking about something that has been in the works for a long time now, and I'm happy to, talk more about it. It's a product that's been out for a while. And do we have our little slide presentation on it? While they're doing that, it's been out for a while. For about 3 years now, and it's called the Audio Chameleon C-Level. And we're going to be talking about not only what it does, but kind of bringing in some things that I've been working on over the years. Last year I did a presentation on what's LUFS, and that's kind of like a lead-in to what this product does because it incorporates a lot of that technology in it. So first of all, just get into the story of this. Let's see, it was my remote not advancing. Oh. Come on, advance. There we go. All right, this has been in the works for a long time, and it's a story that starts with pirate radio. In fact, my pirate station, I was 12 years old or whatever. I put a station together, I was on the radio, and having a good time with it. But the one thing I noticed is that I just sounded like the record. Everybody else sounded more exciting than I did. And I was thinking, is this a different version of the songs? The records, they have a special cut or an edit or whatever. And I just kind of went with the mystery of thinking, maybe it's because I'm not in stereo. Yeah, that's it. I need to be in stereo, then I'll sound like everyone else. So I was playing around at one of my friends' houses with my little transmitter and doing things. And one of the parents were all downstairs listening to what we were doing upstairs in the room. And when we were done, the stepdad of one of my friends came down and goes, you know what you really need? You need an audio processor. And then at that point, it's like, what's that? And that sounds like what I need. So he wasn't an engineer. He just kind of described it. It's a box that puts together, and it splits audio into 3 or more bands, puts it back together, and makes you sound louder than you really are. And I was like, that's what I need. That's what I'm missing. So I looked up and saw the cost of it, and the next thing you know, it's like, okay, I can't afford to do that. How do you make one? So then that started my whole journey as to how to make an audio processor so my station can sound the way it does. And by 1986 or so, I had my first, it was a wideband, before that, I had a wideband processor going, but I didn't like what it sounded like. Yeah, it gave me more exciting sound, but it's pumping and wheezing and all kinds of things that you get with a wideband. And I started playing around with ways to mitigate that. And I had no idea what was going on other radio stations or anything, what the equipment was actually doing. I just had to listen to what was on the radio and try to imitate it with what I had. And so I came up with time constants that slide around and things like that. And that kind of became the basis of everything that happened after that. Once I had something that was sounding as good as it did, but it wasn't multiband yet, I had went to town. And I made multi-band versions of what I had and modified around with that. And then right about in the late 80s or so, I came up with a 4-band leveling AGC to go in front of the limiters I had. And that eventually went on to become what my friend would describe as an audio chameleon. And because he liked the way it was able to adapt from song to song, you could just hear it over the radio when he was listening to it. So that became a formal thing. And about 1990, I had the ideas for this going together. And here you can see one of my many binders of all the stuff I did in analog. which later on would become a godsend when I went to do this stuff in DSP. And here you can see where it lived in the chain, where you have your program sources and the Chameleon and all that. And what's left of it now? Well, that's all that's left of that first one now. Because at the time, being a teenager, I didn't have a lot of money. So if I wanted to make something new, I would cannibalize the thing before it and make it into something new. So that's all that's really left of it now. But that's the one that started the whole journey. I call it the Audio Chameleon. APS 1000 is what I call that. And that led to variations of the Chameleon from that point on. Until we get to later on, this puppy, which I call Grandpappy. So anytime you're talking to me about audio processors and I mention Grandpappy, it's the original, really the last of the analog Chameleons before I started working on DSP work. While I was working on this, I kind of made all kinds of notes as to what would have to happen in the DSP version to imitate what these things did. And then I started working on DSP. The cool story that I could tell about this whole process was by the time I got to this and the ideas that are in the Chameleon where it can self-adapt and self-tune and adjust all its time constants to the programming, it kind of came from when I got a hold of an Audio Prism book, the Glenn Clark product. And it didn't do a whole lot, but the fact that it made decisions in the first place fascinated me. So, and it made decisions based on gates inside, so it either compressed, expanded, or did nothing. And I was thinking, well, what if I take this to the whole next level and be able to have the processor design, control everything inside. And the cool story was later on I became friends with Glenn Clark. We would go to, his favorite thing was to go to pizza shops. The more hole in the wall, the better. And if they didn't take credit cards, he knew it was a great one and we need to go there. So I got to talking about this with him, and he goes, can I hear what you're working on right now? Because he knew I was working on DSP. I was like, sure, yeah. So you have to go in the basement of my house where I have my stuff set up. That's okay, let's go. So I go in and drag him in the house, and at the time I was married, I was like, hi, honey, there's somebody here that's come to hear what my stuff I'm working on. Don't worry about it. So we go down, and he starts having me play different songs. He says, do you have this song? Yeah, play it. He'll stand under one speaker, listen. Go to the next one and listen. And then, do you have this other song? Sure. And he didn't say anything. He just listened to all these songs I was playing. And then he goes, what you have here is magic in a box. And here, for me, that was like, whoa. So I was waiting for something critical coming from Glenn Clark. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And then later on, he pulls out a wallet. What would it take to go in business with you on this? I was like, Glenn Clark is asking me, well, problem is that I've already been talking to Frank Vody for a while. And he goes, oh, I knew Frank would get a hold of you. And that's kind of how I ended up in Omnia doing the work with the Omnia 11. This stuff got put on the back burner when I went to work on at Omnia. And I basically just used the technology that Telos already developed and built on that when I was there. So this is like, this slide here is just my ideas on the DSP that, would lead to this stuff. So after Omnia, I moved on to other things, and then I teamed up with Catfish. And at this time, I was working on figuring out how to get the DSP algorithms to sound like my analog ones. And that's a topic that's a whole presentation in and of itself, these things I learned, because in analog, there's what you intended to do and how it comes out. But there's a lot of things that goes on in the way the electronic components behave that you have to imitate in DSP. Because DSP will do literally what you say to do. And without going into a long rabbit hole, that was a lot of learning. But for me to take something I did in analog and make it sound the same in DSP was a lot of work. And that ended up becoming C-Level as one of the first products out the door. So the first 4-band leveling unit became this DSP product, which is the first time I've got that to go. Now, C-Level is a bit of an odd duck here because it's the first processor that's, from me, where it's incorporating all that automatic tuning stuff inside. And the basic idea for it is that you could take and replace your whatever you're using before, whether it's a Compeller or Ariane or whatever, and a lot of those things went out of production quite a bit ago, so everyone's running on the same old tired stuff they had before. So the idea is we can replace it with this. And you treat it as if you're putting in a wideband AGC, but what it actually is a 4-band audio processor, a leveling processor. And the crossovers on it are gentle enough so that it doesn't fight with the downstream audio processing on the air. It's very simple to set up, and we'll go through that in a second because I can actually tell you here how to set it up. One of the things it does is it is able, if you put it in calibrated mode, it'll put out a pretty consistent minus 24 LUFS audio program level signal to your audio processor. And last year I was here, I did a paper on what's LUFS. It's on the CCBE website if you want to go and watch that and get a deeper dive into that. But for an audio processing, a leveling processor, one of the things it does is it takes the strain off of your main audio processor. And what I mean by that is we've all heard it on the air, especially if you play a station, if you have a station that plays a wide range of music. Older songs would tend to sound pretty cool in the way you're used to hearing them. But the newer songs that are smashed within an inch of their life would tend to sound overdone, overbaked over the air through your processor. Part of it is because you're taking something that's already hyper-processed and you're adding a bunch of processing to it to sound louder on the dial, and the two add up. And the other is that music that comes in just hammers the front end of the processor pretty hard. And the way most console and digital audio workstation level meters work, they're all based on peak level. And so what you're doing is you're peak normalizing everything as a disc jockey, but without the RMS levels. If things are based on things like a VU meter, the problem will be a lot less severe going through your air chain, but that's just not how the world is. So what this does is it's seeing audio in terms of loudness. So a really smashed song, it'll pull it back enough so that it's not overly hammering the audio processor downstream. And then newer songs, it'll relax enough and just basically ear match the loudness between the different sources. So it does pretty good with that, with making things sound a little more consistent over the air. The original intent was to replace the front end of things like Omnia 6s and old Orbands and things like that. And that's about all I thought of, but I wasn't thinking of things like the Omnia 11 and all that, and which I designed the whole dynamics on the Omnia 11. But of course, users did use it with the 11 anyway. And they all told me how great it sounded with the Omnia 11. I was like, really? But the 11 should be able to handle that on its own. I designed both. They were, I'm telling you, you got to try it. So I did. It's like, wow, the two kids played well with each other. So it's kind of cool. The other thing with this is that you treat it in your chain same as you would a wideband AGC. Don't even think about it as a multiband. And the idea is it sums things together flat. So no matter what, and what I mean by flat, it's kind of like statistically flat. So like an average, in your programming content. And I did that because you've already got equalizers and multiband mixers and all that in your downstream processor. Why duplicate this and just make it more complicated? So that's kind of the idea behind it. Now, the other nice thing about this is if you're using watermarking encoders, and water here is a little bit of a mummy here. If you're using things like watermarking encoders, one of the things that the problems you run into with like a wideband AGC is that when you play songs with lots of bass in it or bass content in general, over time what happens is that bass energy will cause the wideband to push the level down even further because of the energy in the bass. And watermark encoders need to have enough mid-range content available to be able to mask the tones in the case of like Nielsen or whatever. And wideband AGCs can make that all work a little bit worse. Having a multi-band encode leveler in front means that there's always enough mid-range energy present on average to cause the encoders to work a little bit better. So something like this will definitely help if you don't have an insertion point in your older audio processor. Jeez. Let's see. So let's take a peek inside what's going on this C-Level. And we have the input conditioning where we remove some of any DC or subsonic components that can disrupt things in the chain. And it goes into the subtractive 4-band crossover. Then we have 4 bands of what I call smart RMS processing in this. And this is kind of one of the secrets to why it doesn't need a lot of controls. When we sum it together, again, like I said, it statistically sums flat. And then you have your loudness leveling and protection limiter on it. The protection limiter is there, like if this is in front of an STL or digital STL or whatever, it's set up to do a -1 dB true peak. It has a true peak limiter. So you don't have to worry about overshoots on your digital links, no matter what. If you go from a silent song into a loud, and it's doing its level adjustment, you'll get peaks coming through. The limiters will kind of pretty transparently limit that. It's not clipping, it is a look-ahead limiter. We have a gate system that you watch. It's like the main gate or the master gate that will, whenever there's silence, it's about -50-ish dB full scale. Things fall below that, it does a gain lock, as I call it. It frees the bands so they don't suck up things. But the bands are able to do their own freezing dynamically with the program content. And they can do that because inside each band, this is each one of the RMS bands in the C-Level, there's a parameter control or a brain that each processor has where it's looking at what's coming into the processor, it's looking at what's coming out of each of the processors, and it has a historical memory associated with it, so it keeps track over time what's coming in versus what it's doing when it comes out. And it's able to kind of tune the attacks, releases, and all of that, all those parameters on its own based on what it's seeing. So it's balancing what's happening right now versus what's been coming in and how it's been reacting to it over time. And then, you have a question? How long is that buffer? It is not it's not really a buffer the way you think of a buffer, so there's no time delay, but it's tracking a history that in the C-Level, it's roughly about like the last 15 seconds or so. You know, what's coming in, what's come out, and it compares it to what's going on right now. And whatever user controls you have, which there are a few but you can influence what this parameter control is doing. It takes that in consideration, as well as whatever it's seeing coming from the master gate. It's looking at information coming from the other 3 bands in the unit. And also, it's sending information out to the other 3 bands. And what they do is they use that data coming in and out to know what's happening with their neighbors and the other bands below, so they can kind of coordinate their gain states and accordingly if needed. So and they can also ignore any data coming from any one of the bands. So one of the things that in my development I like watching is how they are able to group and ungroup from each other during a song or during a series of songs. But that keeps it so that it's not running things totally unhinged and bands moving all over the place. So with that in mind, we're going to jump into some of the user adjustments on this and how complicated it is to use this. So on the front panel of the C-Level, we've got a 10-turn trim pot as the first control for those on this monitor. I forget there's another monitor here that you use to either set the peak output level, or if you're running an uncalibrated level, what the actual LUFs are going to be. So in calibrated mode, like I mentioned before, it's at -24 LUFs. And in uncalibrated mode, it could range, if you go 10 turns counterclockwise, it's -24 LUFs. 10 turns clockwise, it's -16 LUFs. So I would say you want to go 5 turns or so for most audio processors, and that's fine. If you go beyond that, unless it's a really stripped down basic processor, anything more than 5 turns to the right is pretty extreme for over the air. Then you have a 4-position switch here, where at the 6 o'clock level position, it's bypass, so it's not doing anything at all. At the 9 o'clock position, when you switch it, where these little indicators are here on the front panel, the 9 o'clock position is really gentle and light, so you're going to barely hear it doing anything, but it's doing a lot. It's just not very audible. 12 o'clock position is like medium level of density, which is where most of the users tend to put it for most formats. And then at the 3 o'clock position, that's pretty thick. And some people will use it that way, if they're into it, but most people are at the 12 o'clock position with this that I've talked to. So that's what's on the front panel. The back panel, there's a couple of dip switches in the back. The first one, switch A, determines whether or not it's calibrated -24 LUFS or an uncalibrated user-determined loudness target. And the switch B is the detail enhancer. So when you switch in the detail enhancer, you'll notice that it brings out some details in the highs and the lows, and it does it dynamically on your program content. If you're using something like an Omnia 9 and you want to preserve the activity of the declipper and all that, I would say you probably want to turn off detail enhancer. But other than that, it's a cool little feature. Now, when I mentioned on the C-Level being that it operates with the loudness in mind, and these are some slides that I used last year that I'm bringing back right now and just kind of show you what it does. So let's just say you have a song, 2 different songs that play in your station here. This one is an older recording, and where the peaks come out to almost full scale 0, and the average loudness on this is about -16 LUFS, I believe. The second song here is a Dua Lipa song, actually, and what you do in processing for loudness, and record companies do this too, is if you were to shave all the peaks off of something like this and turn up the middle piece so that its peak loudness is up here versus the average thing down there, that to the ear would sound louder. But this is what causes issues with over-the-air processing, because things are being peak normalized where this is way up here where the peaks are versus that. And you don't want that. So when you have a loudness leveler involved in here, like what's in the C-Level, it will take this song and loudness match it to the previous one, which looks small, but it sounds the same. The two, if you play them back to back to the ear, they're exactly matched. And this is important to know because of one of the things that throws people off with the C-Level. And that is when they connect it to an audio processor that's got peak reading meters for input levels, one of the things that they think is happening is that some songs they'll see the meter reading about 10 dB lower than others, and they'll write in a catfish or call or whatever. I think there's a problem with the C-Level. It's not really doing gain control like it's supposed to. Why do you say that? The levels are inconsistent. And what's really happening is that on a peak reading meter, if you look at these 2 songs, the song with a lot of peaks in it will show about 10 dB hotter than the one with no peaks. To the ear, they're matched the same. So if you were to hang a VU meter on the output of C-Level under those conditions, the VU meter, which is RMS based, get out of the feedback zone, which is RMS based and it shows loudness to the ear, you'll see the VU meter shows exactly the same level, but the peak reading meters will be the ones showing inconsistent levels. So that's an important thing I want to point out. If anybody wanted to try C-Level and their audio processor has peak reading input levels on them, if you see that, don't worry. On a really dense song, it's going to end up being about -18 or so dB on a peak reading meter. That's normal. So, C-Level, it's an audio processor that's fully self-tuning, and it uses the historical data to automatically adjust attack and release times and other parameters inside. And it does it on a song-to-song basis, a moment-to-moment basis. So the same song the parameters may set up one way at the beginning, and as the song changes, the parameters will adapt to the song as it plays along. And gives you a more consistent processing experience that way. And this is sort of like when anybody's worked with audio processors knows that you set the audio processor up for about to sound good on about 75–80% of your library, because there's always those outside cases where it just never really sounds right on that song. But if you would adjust it to sound good on either one of those extremes, the bulk of your music would sound bad. So the idea behind this is that it handles all that on its own. So you just set a certain density target and you're good. It's a different kind of way to think about multiband processing, in that there's not hundreds of controls on this thing. And that is something that's true of any of the audio chameleons that I've designed, where there's very few controls on it, but they do a whole lot. And one story that Catfish wanted me to make sure to talk about was the story of our buddy Chris Tarr, who was one of the first people that used C-Level before it was even out. And he called up Catfish and he goes, I like the C-Level and all that, but I have a problem. It's got no controls on it. And Catfish goes, okay, so what would you like to adjust? I just need some, I just don't have any way to adjust it. I just kind of feel weird about it. And Catfish goes, is there something wrong with it? No. What is it that you want to change? Nothing. So why do you need controls? I don't know. I don't know. In Corny we trust, I guess. It's one of these things that, you got to trust that this thing is going to do what you're going to do. And he goes, is it doing it? Yeah. Okay. So what's your problem? None. I don't know. It's just weird. Then he bought C-Levels for all the stations in his company after that. So it's a different way of thinking about audio processing. And the way it works, it definitely does add new life to older processors. And it does a pretty good job with new ones too. But a lot of people with older Omnia 6s and all that were just amazed at how much they can make it, how much better things sounded when you put a new modern AGC in front of it. So there you go. So try to keep it short and simple, but not overwhelm people, but a lot of fun. If you want to know more information on C-Level, you can go to AngryAudio.com, or if you want to do the little QR code, it takes you right to the page there. And conclude with a picture of one of my rockets on the pad number 3 out of Geneseo, New York. My hobby is high power rocketry, so I build and fly rockets, but that's what that's about.
I thought that was a C-box that didn't work.
So with that, I open up to any questions you might have about this.
Any questions, guys?
Any thoughts?
Don't be shy. Put your hands up.
You're about to put your hands up? Yeah.
Hold on.
Is it only going to be available in hardware version?
It could exist in software. So one of the things I wanted to do is ask, what applications do you have in mind with that? So if streaming? Okay. There is a streaming version in software of audio. There's 2 different chameleons that do that in software. One is the C4S. That's the kind of the entry-level one, and the C6S. They are a little more, they do a little more than the C-Level does, because the C-Level on the stream, you could use it on the stream, but it won't sound like anything in particular to the listeners, because its job is to try to transparently level things out. C4S and C6S have a little more oomph in it, so you can get more of that radio sound in your stream. So, and I can do a paper on any of those later if anybody wants to hear more about the other products, but I forgot to start with this one. Any other questions? Yes, it is.
All right, Cornelius, I want to thank you very much from the CCBE for coming and doing this.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Hopefully we'll have you again next year, and here you go.
Thank you.
All right.